In Brazil, 1977, Marcelo is a technology expert in his early 40s on the run. Hoping to reunite with his son, he travels to Recife during Carnival, but soon realizes that the city is not the safe haven he was expecting. The Secret Agent is directed by Kleber Mendonça Filho and stars Wagner Moura. So Matt, what'd you think of The Secret Agent?
So this is an absolutely amazing and breathtaking film that's fantastically rendered with its very vibrant colors and textures to its lively new characters. The film is in many ways in conversation with last year's I'm Still Here, which is also a film about the military dictatorship that was in Brazil. So it's taking place around the same time frame, and it's also highlighting a lot of the same thematics that we saw in I'm Still Here. We have this focus on memories and this past storyline that's being juxtaposed with these present day moments where these two women at school are trying to piece together these memories that are kind of fractured in a way because we have clippings of sounds and audio tape, little clippings in the newspapers. So they're trying to piece together a story, and we're seeing this piecing together at the same time in which we're actually seeing the story, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. But just like in I'm Still Here, there's this really intense focus on the importance of documentation, as our main character in this film is literally looking for documentation about his birth mother in this facility as he's kind of undercover, just in hiding from the military dictatorship. So while this film is broaching a lot of the same subject matter, I think it's doing it in a way that's very different in this film, which we'll have to get into down the line. One of my favorite things about this film, I was talking about how vibrant and texture this film is, but the film is making such a conscientious choice to focus on a lot of these textures and details. There's a lot of close-ups in these films on little elements, such as like a record player, but those focus on the objects just make the film feel so layered in texture in a way that I really, really enjoyed.
The filmmaker who made this film, I was first introduced to his work through this film called Bacurau, which came out during the pandemic. It was on Criterion Channel. It might still be on the Criterion Channel, but that movie is like an absolute riot. But he's also made a film I haven't seen called Pictures of Ghosts, which is also a documentary about the military dictatorship in Brazil. And I think has a lot in common with this film from what I hear, but I'm anxious to watch that at some point. But his propensity for extremity and violence certainly makes its way into The Secret Agent, even though it's a far less violent film than Bacurau is. But it's really interesting how this movie is structured because it has this winding, very lazy, lackadaisical style that in its initial stretch reminded me of like the Argentinian film The Descendants, where it just has this sprawling, very roundabout way of going about its plot. We're introduced to our main character who seems to have some secrets, a pair of hitmen, various refugees, and then this 77-year-old woman who houses him, who like is on the border of like stealing the entire movie.
She is the best in this film.
Yeah, and all of this information is given to us in such like a process-oriented procedural way that it's really interesting. And even though the film is quite long, it actually, I think, is the better for it because there's a playfulness in its structure and almost like a discursiveness that it allows itself to have these odd flourishes throughout the film that I think makes it so much better. Some of those diversions are some of my favorite scenes in the movie. And the movie is really bifurcated by this scene in the middle, which is remarkably tense. And it's a scene that rewards your patience and opens up the film in a way. And from there, the movie is basically a thrill ride. But before that, you have to be pretty patient with all of these pieces coming together, and they do come together. We saw it 2.5 months ago, and I'm really glad that we took a long time to review it because I've been really picking over this movie in my brain. And I think that it has some effects that are immediate and quite exciting and very fulfilling as a viewer. But it also has quite a bit to reflect on that I think some of the density, like in terms of it being a dense text, I think can really only start to show its layers with time. And yeah, I think this is a very remarkable film.
I find it very interesting that one of the first things you talked about was the violence in the film.
It's remarkably violent.
But it's also not the first thing I think about when it comes to this film.
We didn't know very much about this movie. So, we walk into it and within 20 minutes they're like cutting open a tiger shark and fishing a leg out of it, and we're considering I had seen Bacurau, that movie's very violent, and it's violent in like a Quentin Tarantino way that it's kind of fun, like we're getting revenge on these jerks in that movie. This movie related to Bacurau in that specific way that its violence is cartoonishly graphic.
Yeah,
but you're right, this isn't like if I had to describe this movie in 10 adjectives, I'm not sure violent would be the first one, but
Yeah.
when it is violent, it's quite violent.
Yeah, but there is a particular focus with its violence, and the characters it chooses to show the violence being attributed to,
Yes.
and the people that it doesn't choose to show.
Yes, we'll definitely talk about that.
We'll dabble in
Yes.
that in a little bit. That would be too spoilery to talk about so far.
Yes.
So going from there, I want to get to Wagner Moura playing Armando and Marcelo in the film, because his main priority here is to find this documentation to prove his parentage, as well as get his son, Fernando, played by Enzo Nunes, back so that way they can go off and live their lives together. That's like his main goal, is getting his son back. Enzo Nunes, I thought he was absolutely fantastic in the film. He doesn't play like a major role in the film. He's not very prominent in the film, but there's this one very particular scene where he's driving in the back of the vehicle as his dad is driving. And he has this very particular look about himself where he seems very uneased or concerned about the situation. And then you see his dad quickly look back at him. And then when he catches his eye, his face suddenly turns into a smile. And then as his dad goes back to looking at the road, his face immediately goes back to the sense of unease about him. So I thought that was just amazing acting, because there's not really many lines in this moment, but it's just so apparent on his face that he's concerned about what's going on, but he's also trying to put up a good front for his dad. What's very interesting is his memory plays differently in my mind later on at the end of the film. So I'll get into that later, but that's the reason I mention it now. But with Wagner Moura, as you were saying, he is really good in this role because he is super charismatic. His relationship to the grandma that you were talking about, she is so fantastic in the film. She is so blunt in the way she talks about things and people. One of the first times in which we come across her, he has arrived at her kind of like hideaway place, and she immediately introduces him to this other woman, and she's literally trying to get them to be together. So she's just like cracking all these wise jokes, but she's just really fantastic in the film because she brings a lot of this levity and humor, and I would say like a lot of heart. I think this is something that like we're constantly reminded about in like dictatorship. There is still life happening, and there's still joy that you could find in these difficult moments, and I think that is her main purpose in the film, is to show us this joy that exists even in these difficult times.
Yeah, I mean, basically the whole ensemble is good here, but I love the idea of like these refugees who are waiting all under the same roof, essentially in the same apartment building, waiting for their better life as they're being housed by this woman. They all give magnificent performances, and there's some scenes that we're afforded of hearing their stories, which I think is really magnificent stuff. But the woman who's sheltering them, she's played by Tânia Maria, and she manages to be kind of like you were saying, just hilarious, warm, but having like an absolutely biting morality and hatred for the dictatorship and her hatred for oppression. None of those people are quite as magnificent as Wagner Moura in this film, who won the Best Actor at Cannes, and deservedly so. And he wears a lot on his face. Like there's a world weariness and a quiet, tired panic on his face throughout the film, but as I was watching it, especially in the early stretches, I thought he was really good, but I was like, if he's won Best Actor at Cannes, are they, for the first time ever, giving an award to a very subtle performance? And it's really that scene in the middle, above the projectionist in that apartment.
Yes.
That he's given like a real scene to shine, and then from there on, it's quite a different performance and a much more intense performance. So I think that he's given a range in this film that is really something to behold.
I love that you mentioned that panic quality about him, because the way he appears panicked but also has to remain as calm as possible is like a very particular look on somebody's face.
Yeah.
And he has to pull that off in these sequences where he ends up butting up against the local police, who don't really work as the military does, so they don't know who he is.
Yeah, so he has to convey to the audience that he's panicking inside while appearing calm on the outside to these authority figures. And that's showcased so beautifully in the opening scene of the movie, which is like just weird. And ends up, he basically stumbles on this gas station, and there's a dead body there that's just covered with cardboard. And birds are trying to eat the dead body, and the stray dogs are coming to eat the dead body. And this like gigantic man is chasing the dogs away, saying, "You scoundrel, stop trying to eat the body." It's hysterical stuff. It's really weird. But it ends up being a mostly non sequitur in terms of setting up the film. Like, it sets up the setting a little bit. It tells us about Carnival. It gives us a sense of the the police force in this area. It's a marvelous scene simply because I think it's a non sequitur. But his performance in that scene, especially reflecting back on it, because when you're first seeing the scene, you really don't know.
You have no idea what
you don't
it's
know
about.
what's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
You're like, is the dead body his friend? Is this someone he's searching for? What is he escaping from? We're like deliberately not given very much context in that scene. But looking back on it, where the scene goes, it's actually one of the funnier scenes in the movie.
Oh, so funny. The way the attendant just nonchalantly just says what happened and also just is waiting. He's like, it's been like 48 hours, but the police are busy or something like that.
Yeah, he's like, the police are busy with Carnival.
But it's funny because the police that come by aren't there for the same business. Like he thinks they're there to like take care of this body,
Yeah.
but they really aren't. So they don't really do anything about the body.
Yeah, they don't do anything about the body, and then they shake down Wagner Moura's character and ask him for money.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have any money, so he gives them cigarettes.
Oh my gosh, that's such a running joke in this film. How like somebody needs like a little bit of cash or a little bit of something.
Yeah,
As,
and
like,
it's
a payoff.
we were talking before, I think it was with Knives Out, and how it's there are these odd things that end up uniting films. Odd tip culture and random people asking for money in tense situations is apparent here, and it was just an accident, which is pretty funny.
So I think go from here, I have a lot to talk about, but a lot of that requires spoilers, I think, or a deeper conversation about the film. So if you're ready, should we get into spoilers?
I will say that I really, really like this film, and I think it goes in a lot of surprising directions, so I would highly encourage people see it before they listen to our spoilers.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just its ability to be so textured and grounded and lifelike, like you really feel like you're there. Like there's a grittiness to like the quality of the footage and the cinematography, very colorful nature about the film, which just butts up directly against like this harsh reality that's occurring at the same time. And it's like a sad film, but there's also happiness or resilience in it.
It's a sad film. It's there's happiness, there's resilience, there's a lot of anger, and I think like very justifiable anger. But what you're saying too is not only what it is either, because there are these surrealistic flourishes in the movie that are so odd. There's a thing that has to do with like a killer leg. There's these odd little flourishes that they decide to leave in the film that I think it's so much the better for just being that. And refusing to be, a simple procedural thriller or a simple historical thriller. There's a lot here.
All right, so from here, we're going to go into spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film The Secret Agent, now would be a good time to go away and then come back once you've seen it, because we are going to spoilers. Wee-oo. So as the film progresses, and you alluded to this briefly, there's this sequence where Marcelo is finally caught. He is found and he's being shot at, and there's this big chase sequence that's happening through the streets of the city. I hate to bring down this scene in my mind, but when we were at New York Film Festival, the sound completely cut out from the sequence, and it was a really important sequence. This is like the climax of the film, I would say, in many ways. It was unfortunate that the sound disappeared. And then it was like the audience, there was very few people in the audience that were doing this, but they're just like sighing really loud, or they're being like, come on.
I happen to be sitting next to one of them, actually.
Yes, and I was
very annoying.
I get it. The sound is gone. They're going to fix it eventually. But the most important thing that I was trying to do in this moment is just pay attention to the dialogue that was on the subtitles and the visuals, so I could still get a sense of what was happening during the sequence. Right before it cut out, I noticed that there was very like tense music that was playing that was very also upbeat.
It's like a rock jazz fusion playing, and it's there's a lot of like high-pitched, high-tone horns going.
Yeah.
It's an amazing sequence, and it's like brilliantly orchestrated, and it's unfortunate that sound cut it out, but I was in the same position as you. I was trying to put my mind into the film as much as I possibly could, because it was the scene where basically all of these minute details of plot collide all at once.
There's a convergence and a tension that's built upon the whole thing at this point.
When we saw the film, the director introduced it, and he told the projectionist to rock the house, meaning like turn up the sound really loud. And I'm watching this movie for like 2 hours. I'm like, why? You know what I mean?
And that's when we found
Yeah,
out.
then there's this like 15-minute sequence that like blows your socks off. So I kind of understand why he was saying that.
Yeah, but going back to what we were saying earlier, this film makes a very conscious decision to show its violence only in certain moments. And it's interesting that after the fact, we find out that Marcelo was killed in this tense sequence, but we don't see it. And we don't even know. It kind of leaves us hanging. And then a couple scenes down the line, when the two women in the school are looking through the newspaper clippings, they find one that shows that he had died. I just really appreciated that we didn't get to see his death. What matters is how he lived his life and what he was fighting for, rather than how he died. So it's just really putting a clear focus on who the violence is really a tribute to. It's a tribute to the people that are actually committing it. So like the violence that we see on the screen are the people that are chasing him down. They're the people that are responsible for supporting this military dictatorship.
Yeah, and like though I love moral ambiguity, and I love when a film asks us to have some kind of strong discourse as we're walking out of the theater afterwards. There is something to the clear-eyed morality that this film brings. Like, it's a film that's has a very clear sense of right and wrong, and almost has like a sense of how could the country let this happen. It's a pretty angry film, and it has a very clear moral outrage, but it's also not without reflection. And some of that comes from the mid-film jump that you're talking about, where the film is essentially moving ahead almost 50 years in the timeline, and it makes that decision to not show the death of our main character, and that's relegated to the newspaper article that you were describing, where we just see this dead body. And that's a really interesting choice to show the death of the character that we spent 2.5 hours with, because in a certain sense, another dramatist might say you're robbing the audience of a very emotional moment of the death of your main character. But ultimately, the film's motivations here become much more about meditations on the past, on memory, on what we leave behind. By transferring that to a news article, it's a reminder that history is one thing when it's on the page, but it's quite another thing when it's an individual's lived experience. And there's an inherent distance when you read about an event in history that for every person that's involved, it's as harrowing and as intense an experience as you putting yourself in that position and imagine living through it. Like, wrap your head around that separation between the person's lived experience and the historical document itself. And even though so much is lost to history, we're left piecing together things from whatever is recorded and left over. I don't know for how propulsive and suspenseful the film is sometimes. It's actually at its most piercing when it pauses to reflect, especially in those last 20 minutes or so. Much of the same way when the same subject matter that I'm Still Here did last year, as you mentioned at the top of the review.
Which has that same switch towards the end of the film where its focus becomes on the memory and the documentation more so than everything that we saw of the story beforehand.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mournfulness to the last 15 minutes of this movie, because we saw all the things that this character was fighting for, and now we see people 50 years later trying to piece that together and make a narrative out of it and be inspired by it. It's up to us, like the people in the future, to be able to put these things together, and we'll never truly get the full picture of what he was fighting for because it's lost to time, which is a really sad thing to meditate on.
Yeah, I absolutely love the way that these fragmented memories are being weaved into the storytelling of the film. I thought it was absolutely impeccable because we, as you were just saying, and as I wrote down as well, we as audience members are really given this full context, but we also get to witness the struggle that the people in the present day are going through trying to make sense of all these fragmented pieces. And I thought this just really elevated and highlighted how important it is to document these things, but it also highlights how these materials can be interpreted by others who are seeing them so much later on, which you basically just said as well. So we had that pretty much the same thought. But it reminded me of, in the Q&A, the director was also talking about, in a very meta-contextual way, how this Q&A was going to be interpreted by other people 50 years from now. And so I think it's very interesting that we see these characters towards the end of the film, how they all deal with this material and deal with looking back at the past. And it's very interesting because Wagner Moura also plays the older version of his son in the film. We see how much importance and weight that this information and piecing it together holds to this one particular woman that is at the school. She cares so much and so deeply about putting this together, and she thinks this information is so important. And then she finds that the son is still alive, and she brings all this to him. And he's like, like a 30-year-old man that's working as a doctor. She goes and she gets her blood drawn, and that's kind of like her excuse to go into his office and talk to him. And she brings up the subject of his father. He both says that he doesn't remember anything about his father, which is extremely sad. Mm-hmm. To top it off, he doesn't want to know anything. Yeah. So he kind of rejects her completely. It's very sad. And it made me think a lot of the wise old saying, I don't remember who said it, but those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. I don't know. I just found that very interesting that that's the note that the film decides to leave us on.
I think that could mean a great many things. I'm sorry, like I always have these like highfalutin examples in the way I relate to things, but I don't know if anyone in the audience has read War and Peace, but basically the last like 100 pages of War and Peace becomes this philosophical treatise on the way that we view history and how you can never know that you're part of history because you're just living your life. You're living the literal current events of your life. So then what are those going to mean in the context of history once historians are making history, and how much of that is the actual story that happened and not just our brains making a narrative out of, whatever we can find from history, whatever historical documents we can dig up. And we never truly know how much of the picture we're seeing, right? So I started thinking about that in regard to this film because it's very tricky and nuanced about the way that history is replicated here. And I think that there's a certain part of him, because he has a personal connection to it, that he simply doesn't want to go back there.
Yeah.
He's like, we don't need to go back there. Whereas from a historian's perspective, that's a very, very different thing.
Yeah,
the only thing
true. Yeah.
the only thing we need to do is go back there.
Yeah.
So I think that at that point you have the motivations, the two different character motivations colliding with very opposite intentions. So I'm not very judgmental of his character, but I think it shows a deep pain in the way that you can view history when you were part of it rather than somebody who was outside of it.
Oh, did I sound judgmental? I didn't mean to be judgmental.
You kind of said that he's doomed to repeat the past.
I don't get too much from him in terms of the characterization there. I don't get too much in terms of I don't really want to go back there.
Well, there's a deep pain in his eyes.
Yeah, was there? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, the way that Wagner Moura is also really good in this scene, by the way, I didn't see it as a dislike or a hatred for his father.
I didn't see it as like a dislike or hatred of his father. I just saw it mostly as sad.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of sadness in that he doesn't really want to know anything, and also that he doesn't remember anything. So I am curious, like, was he lying in that moment that he does remember and he just doesn't want to revisit it because it's too painful?
That wouldn't strike my mind. I mean, maybe, but like, I don't think so. But I do think that there's some sort of pain in him thinking about it. I mean, he essentially grew up without a family, right?
Yeah.
I mean, both of his parents were killed.
Yeah.
He was
his grandparents.
Yeah. I imagine that comes with a lot of pain, no matter what your dad was fighting for. There could be a whole parallel story here of this child who's effectively a refugee because his parents were so caught up in the oppression and trying to overcome oppression that he was fallen behind in a sense. I think that there's like a deep characterization there that's only hinted at.
So you ready to go to grades?
I'm going to give this film an A. I think it's really remarkable. I think it's one of the best films of the year. It is my favorite film that we saw at New York Film Festival.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it has one of the very, very best scripts of the year. It has quite literally everything. It has this slowly evolving story with all of these tangents and characters that are so interesting. And it can be difficult on an initial watch to put all this together because it's really rather dense. But as these storylines start converging, you can see that they were meticulously planned all along. The way it juggles tone, like going through this apartment of refugees, reflecting with one another, and the very touching humanism that it has in these scenes, to the propulsive, like almost crime thriller elements that it embodies in the third act, like that 15-minute sequence we were talking about. And then again, as it morphs one more time to become a reflection on memory, history, piecing together the stories of our ancestors to try to understand them, at the same time having the understanding that we'll never truly have that full picture to know what our ancestors were up to. It's a film that rewards your patience with that dense plot. It also touches you with the motivations of its characters. It takes some real risks, I think, by continually changing the focus of the story, and it has some really, really heavy ideas worth pondering. So this film has been replaying in my head, and I've been able to unlock all of these layers that I think would be there on a second viewing if I was to see it again, and I'm definitely going to see it again, just unfortunately not before this review. I like the movie halfway through, but I wasn't feeling it until that pivotal scene. And so much of what happens in the second half of the movie justifies the first in so many ways. So yes, I think this is just a great movie.
Oh, I actually really liked the opening part of the movie, or just like that first part that you were talking about, because I just saw so much texture and detail in it, and like getting to know these characters. Like, I think it's so important and integral to the rest of the film because you're really building all these building blocks. And
it is very lackadaisical. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I give the film an A. I really, really enjoyed it as well. I thought it was just like as textural and colorful and lived in as I'm Still Here was last year. All the same reasons I loved I'm Still Here are the same reasons I love this film. Its reflections on memory, as you said, and also just its authenticity and grounded nature. And this is something that I think a lot of international features are doing very well, especially this year, tackling such deep thematics and like rooted issues in their societies. I just found so much to connect with in this film, and emotional. Like, I feel emotional in a lot of these films, and this was one of them.
And that's it for a review of The Secret Agent, which is now in limited theaters and will be rolling out in the coming weeks. Definitely check this out if you can, and let us know in the comments what you thought about this film, and we will see you next time.